The school bell had already rung, and the hallway outside buzzed with laughter, chatter, and the heavy slam of lockers. Inside a quiet classroom, 12-year-old Brodie Ritter sat hunched over his desk, staring at the glossy pages of his yearbook. Page after page lay nearly blank, a white desert where there should have been signatures, doodles, and well wishes. He pressed his pen down and wrote in the empty space himself. "I hope someday I have more friends." The words looked fragile on the page, like a whisper carved into glass. His mother, Cassandra, stood at the door, watching her son fold the book shut with a sigh that seemed too heavy for a child. She wanted to say something comforting, but nothing came. What do you tell a boy who just discovered he is invisible to his own classmates? Brodie pulled his backpack onto his shoulders and walked past her, his small frame swallowed by the noise of students and groups. Nobody noticed him leave. Cassandra clutched the yearbook in her hands, her throat tight, her heart aching with helplessness. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and snapped a photo of the page with his lonely handwriting. With trembling fingers, she shared it online, not to shame anyone, not to stir trouble, but because the silence in her son's life had become unbearable. The post was raw and simple. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few kind words from friends, maybe advice from other parents. What she didn't know was that the story of one boy's empty yearbook would soon escape the walls of her home, ripple across the internet, and reach someone she never imagined. By the next morning, her phone buzzed with notifications. Messages from strangers poured in, parents, teachers, even kids from other schools. Tell Brodie he's not alone. He deserves better. Some offered to send him letters, drawings, even yearbooks of their own. Cassandra read every message with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. How had her son's quiet pain touched so many hearts overnight? At school, Brodie kept his head low. He wasn't used to attention, not the kind that made your stomach twist. Kids who had ignored him the day before suddenly looked at him differently. Some with guilt, some with awkward smiles. But the damage was already done. The empty yearbook was more than pages. It was proof that he didn't belong. Cassandra, however, couldn't ignore the momentum building online. Friends began to call, local reporters reached out, and soon the story appeared on news sites. The image of that stark message, "I hope someday I have more friends," became a symbol of childhood loneliness, of how easy it was for a good kid to be overlooked. Brodie didn't quite understand it all. He only knew that his mom seemed busier than usual, always answering her phone, her eyes wet when she thought he wasn't looking. At night, he lay in bed wondering if things would ever change. Kids at school might say something nice for a day or two. But then what? Would he go back to being the boy no one saw? Meanwhile, far away from their small Colorado town, the story continued to travel. It landed on timelines and screens, scrolling past the eyes of millions. Among them was a man whose face was instantly recognizable to moviegoers around the world. He had worn superhero suits, stood on red carpets, and seen his name in lights. But what drew him in wasn't fame or spectacle. It was the quiet sadness of a boy with an empty yearbook. This man paused, read the story again, and felt something stir. He thought of his own childhood, of moments when he had felt alone, overlooked, uncertain of his place in the world. He knew what it meant to need encouragement, to crave even one voice saying, "You matter." And so, instead of scrolling past, he stopped. He made a decision, because sometimes it doesn't take a blockbuster movie to change someone's life. Sometimes It takes a single act of kindness from a stranger who refuses to look away. Keep watching, because the boy who wrote a wish to himself in an empty yearbook was about to discover that miracles don't always come with capes. Sometimes they arrive with a pen, a letter, and a voice on the other end of the phone. The name Paul Rudd carried weight in Hollywood. To most people, he was Ant-Man, the unlikely superhero who could shrink to the size of an insect and save the world in ways no one expected. But off-screen, Paul was known for something quieter, a warmth that set him apart from other stars. When he read about Brodie's empty yearbook, it wasn't just another sad story in a sea of headlines. It was personal. He remembered what it felt like to be a kid, searching for validation in the smallest gestures. A smile, a word of encouragement, the sense that you belonged. Fame hadn't erased those memories. If anything, it had made him more protective of kids like Brodie, who carried silent burdens heavier than they should. Paul sat in his kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through Cassandra's post. He looked at the photo of the yearbook page, the shaky handwriting. "I hope someday I have more friends." His chest tightened. He could picture the boy behind those words, hunched over a desk, feeling invisible. He could have clicked away. He could have told himself he was too busy, that it wasn't his place. But that wasn't Paul. He believed in showing up, even for strangers. Especially for strangers. That evening, he reached out. Quietly, without press releases, without an entourage, he found a way to contact Cassandra. When she first saw the message in her inbox, she thought it was fake. A scam. Why would Paul Rudd, of all people, care about her son? But as she read the words, her hands trembled. It was real. He wanted to send Brodie a package. More than that, he wanted to speak to him. Cassandra didn't tell her son right away. She wanted the surprise to unfold naturally, to let him feel the full weight of what was happening. Days later, a box arrived at their door, plain brown cardboard, addressed simply to Brodie Ritter. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a gleaming Ant-Man helmet, signed with a silver marker. "To my friend Brodie, Paul Rudd." The boy's eyes widened as he lifted it out of the box. For a moment, he didn't breathe, afraid it might vanish if he blinked. "Is this real?" he whispered. Cassandra nodded, her throat too tight for words. Brodie ran his fingers over the signature, tracing each letter like it was sacred. But the surprises weren't over. Not long after, Cassandra's phone buzzed with a FaceTime call. She handed it to her son, who stared at the screen in disbelief. Paul Rudd's face appeared, smiling gently, his voice warm and steady. "Hey, buddy," Paul said. "I just wanted to tell you, I read your story, and I think you're awesome." Brodie's eyes filled with tears, but he managed a shaky smile. "Really?" "Absolutely," Paul replied. "I know school can be tough, kids can be mean sometimes, but you've got something special. And trust me, the world is going to see it. You're not invisible, Brodie. Not to me, and not to a lot of people who care about you." The boy clutched the phone, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Not because of pity, not because of a viral post, but because someone he admired had taken the time to tell him he mattered. Paul didn't rush the conversation. He asked Brodie about his hobbies, his favorite movies, his dreams. He listened, laughed softly at the boy's shy jokes, and told him he wanted to stay in touch. "Friendship isn't about how many signatures you get in a book," he said. "It's about finding the people who see you for who you are. And I see you, When the call ended, Brodie held the phone against his chest like it was a lifeline. Cassandra wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of a man who could have stayed silent but chose not to. News of Paul's gesture spread quickly, as it always does in the age of social media. Articles popped up. Paul Rudd surprises boy after empty yearbook goes viral. Headlines called him the nicest guy in Hollywood. But beyond the clickbait, the heart of the story remained simple. One boy's loneliness had been met with compassion, and in that meeting, hope was reborn. For Brodie, the signed helmet became more than a piece of memorabilia. It was a shield, proof that he mattered. A reminder that even in the darkest corners of childhood, someone out there could see the light in him. Each time he looked at the signature, he didn't just see Paul Rudd, the actor. He saw Paul Rudd, the man, the one who cared enough to reach across the distance and say, "You're not alone. Keep watching." Because the story didn't end with a helmet and a phone call. It was only the beginning of how one small act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond a single boy in a quiet classroom. The package with the Ant-Man helmet sat on Brodie's desk like a treasure chest. He had shown it to his mother at least a dozen times that day, each time whispering the same words. He really sent it to me. The boy who once felt invisible now carried proof that someone, not just anyone, but a world-famous actor, had looked his way. But the world doesn't stay quiet when stories like this surface. Within hours of Cassandra sharing a photo of Brodie holding the helmet, her phone began buzzing relentlessly. Reporters wanted interviews, bloggers wanted quotes, and news outlets drafted articles with headlines that practically wrote themselves. Paul Rudd surprises lonely boy after yearbook snub. Cassandra hesitated. She didn't want her son turned into a spectacle. This wasn't about chasing attention or fame. It was about kindness. But the story had taken on a life of its own, and holding it back was impossible. Soon their small Colorado town found itself on the map. Local stations aired segments showing Brodie's shy smile as he lifted the helmet into the camera. Morning shows replayed the clip of Paul Rudd's FaceTime call, the actor's calm voice reassuring the boy that he was not invisible. Millions who had never heard of Brodie Ritter before now felt a lump in their throat at the sight of his lonely yearbook page. The reaction was overwhelming. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, teachers wrote letters, and even other celebrities chimed in with support. Fans of Paul Rudd praised him for being a true superhero off-screen, calling his gesture more powerful than any special effect. "This is what being a hero looks like," one comment read. Another wrote, "Forget Ant-Man. Paul Rudd is a giant where it matters most." Brodie's school life began to change, though not instantly. Some classmates who had ignored him before now looked at him with curiosity. A few offered quick apologies, mumbling that they just forgot to sign his yearbook. Others tried to act as though nothing had happened. For Brodie, the shift was confusing. He didn't want pity. He didn't want sudden attention just because the world was watching. What he wanted was genuine friendship. At home, Cassandra struggled with a whirlwind of emotions. Pride that her son had been seen, gratitude for Paul Rudd's kindness, but also fear that the attention might fade, that Brodie might feel forgotten all over again once the headlines moved on. Late at night, after her son was asleep, she scrolled through the flood of online comments, tears blurring her vision. So many people cared. But would they still care tomorrow? Meanwhile, Paul Rudd kept his promise. He didn't just send a helmet and disappear. He checked in again, a short message to Brodie. "Hope you're doing well, buddy. Remember, you're awesome." It was brief, but for a boy who had once been overlooked, those few words carried the weight of 1,000. The story also sparked conversations far beyond Brodie's circle. Parents across the country sat down with their children, showing them the photo of the empty yearbook. "This is why kindness matters," they said. Teachers held discussions in classrooms, reminding students that even small gestures, a signature, a smile, an invitation, could change someone's day. For Brodie, each day felt a little different now. When he walked through the hallways, he no longer felt like a ghost. Kids still gathered in their groups, laughter still echoed off the lockers. But here and there, a hand would reach out. A voice would say, "Hey Brodie, how's it going?" It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The helmet became his anchor. Every morning before school, he glanced at it, his fingers brushing the signature like a secret ritual. It reminded him that he wasn't just the boy with the empty yearbook. He was the boy Paul Rudd called awesome. The world, too, seemed eager to hold on to the story. Opinion pieces praised the actor for setting an example in an industry often clouded by scandal and ego. Talk show hosts cracked jokes, but their voices softened when they spoke of Brodie's smile. Memes circulated with images of the Ant-Man helmet, captioned with words like, "The real superpower is kindness." But beneath the noise, the heart of it remained simple. One man chose not to look away. And because of that choice, a boy who once felt forgotten now carried hope. Keep watching, because this story wasn't finished yet. Brodie's empty yearbook had started a conversation far bigger than a classroom. And Paul Rudd's gesture was proving that sometimes the smallest acts echo the loudest. By the end of the week, the story of Brodie Ritter was everywhere. What had begun as a mother's desperate post on Facebook had exploded into a cultural moment, whispered in kitchens, debated in classrooms, and shared endlessly online. For a while, it seemed like everyone wanted to talk about the boy with the empty yearbook and the Hollywood star who stepped in to remind him he wasn't invisible. National news outlets replayed the footage until it felt etched into memory. Brodie's shaky smile as he held up the helmet, Paul Rudd's calm voice on FaceTime telling him he was awesome. Clips flooded TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and even the evening news that families watched together before dinner. Strangers who would never meet Brodie spoke of him as if they knew him, their voices tinged with both sadness and admiration. But what struck people most wasn't just Brodie's loneliness, it was the response. Paul Rudd hadn't staged a press conference or posed for cameras. He hadn't written a carefully worded public statement. He had done something simpler and far more powerful. He had reached out like a neighbor, not a superstar. That authenticity resonated. Opinion writers praised the humility behind the gesture. In an age where celebrity kindness is often choreographed, Paul Rudd reminds us what it means to be genuine. One columnist wrote. Parents nodded in agreement as they read, grateful that their children had a new kind of role model, not a hero in a cape, but a man who showed up for a child he'd never met. The ripple effect was undeniable. Across the country, schools reported discussions breaking out in hallways and classrooms. Teachers used Brodie's yearbook as a lesson, a reminder that inclusion isn't complicated. It can be as simple as a few words on a page, a small acknowledgement that someone matters. Kids who had never given a thought to the quiet student in the corner suddenly found themselves rethinking their choices. Cassandra watched all this unfold with a strange mix of awe and apprehension. She had wanted support for her son, not fame. Every camera that arrived at their doorstep felt both like a blessing and a burden. She worried that Brodie would become known only as the Yearbook boy, a label too heavy for 12 fragile years. Yet at the same time, she couldn't deny the transformation in her son. Brodie walked a little taller now. He smiled more often. He still wasn't the center of attention at school, but he no longer seemed weighed down by invisibility. When classmates spoke to him, he met their eyes instead of looking at the floor. And each night, before he went to sleep, he placed the Ant-Man helmet carefully on his nightstand, as if to guard his dreams. Meanwhile, Paul Rudd went on with his life, filming, interviews, the relentless schedule of an actor in demand. But the story followed him. Everywhere he went, journalists asked about Brodie. Fans held up homemade signs at movie premieres that read, "Real heroes don't shrink." Late-night hosts made jokes, but always with affection. Who knew Ant-Man's biggest power was a FaceTime call? Paul deflected the attention gracefully. When asked, he simply shrugged and said, "I just wanted to make sure he knew he mattered." No theatrics, no self-praise. Just a quiet conviction that kindness should never require applause. For Brodie, the headlines were less important than the feeling that had taken root inside him. He no longer defined himself by what his classmates had failed to write. He defined himself by the truth that someone saw him, believed in him, and took the time to say so. And yet, beneath all the celebration, there lingered a deeper lesson. One that stretched far beyond Colorado, far beyond a single actor or a single boy. It was about what happens when someone chooses to stay present in another person's pain. About how a simple act, a letter, a call, a signature, can ripple through lives like waves across water. Brodie's yearbook would never be the same. Its empty pages had become famous, etched into the memory of millions. But for him, it was no longer a symbol of loneliness. It was the starting point of a story that proved even the smallest voice can be heard when someone is willing to listen. Keep watching. Because as the headlines faded and the cameras moved on, the true impact of Paul Rudd's gesture was only beginning to unfold. Sometimes, the quietest moments echo the loudest in the lives of those who need them most. As weeks passed, the pace of headlines slowed, but the story refused to disappear. It had already crossed a threshold, stepping beyond news cycles into something more enduring. Brodie's empty yearbook, Paul Rudd's quiet gesture, and the boy's beaming face with the Ant-Man helmet had become part of a cultural language, a shorthand for kindness. On social media, memes bloomed like wildflowers. One showed Brodie holding the helmet with the caption, "Not all heroes wear capes." Some send FaceTime calls. Another pictured Paul Rudd with the words, "The real superpower is empathy." People weren't mocking him, they were celebrating him. Humor became a way of honoring the story, letting millions share in its warmth. Teachers kept the conversation alive in schools across the country. Some printed out Brodie's yearbook page and taped it to classroom doors as a daily reminder. Others held assemblies where they spoke about inclusion, using Paul Rudd's call as an example that even the smallest act could change a life. A few schools even organized kindness weeks, where students were challenged to sign every classmate's yearbook, no exceptions. At Comic-Con, fans shouted jokes about Ant-Man and yearbooks from the audience, and Paul Rudd, grinning, waved them off with good humor. "I think Brodie has more fans than I do now," he quipped during one panel. The crowd roared, but beneath the laughter was something deeper. Admiration for a man who didn't just play a hero, but embodied one. Cassandra sometimes sat back and marveled at the whirlwind her son had been swept into. Strangers still sent letters to their house, handmade cards, encouraging notes, even drawings of Ant-Man shaking hands with a boy. She collected them in a box, unsure what the future would bring, but unwilling to let the tokens of kindness scatter. Brodie often rummaged through the stack, reading aloud words like, "You're amazing," "Stay strong," and "Don't ever think you're invisible again." But she also worried. She knew media attention was fleeting. What would happen when the cameras moved on? Would her son slip back into loneliness? Would the world forget? The questions gnawed at her, even as she watched him grow a little more confident each day. Brodie himself seemed to carry the experience differently. He didn't brag about it at school. He didn't wave the helmet around in the cafeteria. Instead, he treated it as a private reminder, a symbol of hope he could return to whenever doubt crept in. To him, the helmet wasn't just signed plastic. It was proof that someone, somewhere, believed he was worth noticing. And in subtle ways, it began to influence his classmates too. A few who had ignored him before now asked to sit with him at lunch. Others lingered near his desk, trying to find the right words. Brodie didn't trust all of them yet. Kindness born of guilt could fade quickly. But he allowed himself to hope. Maybe friendship was possible after all. Meanwhile, the story took on a life in places Brodie would never see. Pastors told it from pulpits, linking it to sermons about compassion. Motivational speakers referenced it in lectures, holding it up as a parable of modern-day decency. Even political figures, usually quick to argue over everything, shared it as an example of what America needed more of. Simple acts of humanity. Paul Rudd, for his part, kept his distance from the noise. He didn't give long interviews or ride the wave of publicity. When asked, he repeated the same line. I just wanted him to know he mattered. That humility only deepened the respect people felt for him. In a world weary of staged celebrity kindness, his sincerity shone. Brodie's yearbook, once a painful symbol of loneliness, was now something else entirely. The page with his scribbled wish had been printed in newspapers, displayed on TV screens, and shared millions of times online. But to him, it wasn't about fame. It was about transformation. He no longer saw himself as invisible. The world had seen him, and one man had reminded him of his worth. Keep watching, because this wasn't just a viral story anymore. It was becoming something larger, a legend of kindness, a tale retold whenever people needed proof that small acts could ripple into something extraordinary. Months passed, and life in Colorado settled back into its familiar rhythm. The cameras moved on, reporters chased new stories, and the endless tide of social media found fresher headlines to consume. But inside the Ritter home, one object still gleamed with quiet power: the Ant-Man helmet resting on Brodie's nightstand. Each morning, before heading to school, he would glance at it. Sometimes he touched the silver signature with his fingertips, as though drawing strength from the letters. It wasn't about bragging or showing off. It was about remembering. Remembering that once, when he felt completely unseen, someone reached out and said, "You matter." At school, things weren't perfect. Kids could still be careless, sometimes cruel. But the balance had shifted. Brodie wasn't invisible anymore. He had a few more friends now, not because they pitied him, but because they had come to see the boy beneath the headlines. The boy who liked drawing superheroes in the margins of his notebooks. The boy who laughed at corny jokes. The boy who, despite everything, still believed in kindness. Cassandra often watched him with a mixture of relief and awe. She remembered the night she had posted that picture of the yearbook, her heart breaking as she hit share. She had never imagined the ripple it would cause. Yet here she was, months later, watching her son smile more easily, walk with a straighter back, carry himself with the quiet knowledge that he was not alone. For her, the story was less about fame and more about faith. Faith that compassion still mattered in a world too quick to forget it. Faith that even the smallest act, a letter, a call, a simple gesture, could change the course of a child's life. Paul Rudd never made a spectacle of what he had done. He didn't parade it in interviews or turn it into a brand. He simply continued being himself, acting, filming, raising his kids, living quietly. Yet, in countless living rooms and classrooms, his name was spoken with warmth. Not because of box office numbers, but because of a single choice: to stay present in a stranger's pain. The legend of Brodie's yearbook lived on, not in headlines, but in hearts. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime reminder of why kindness matters. Teachers slipped it into lesson plans as proof that empathy isn't abstract. It's real, and it changes lives. Friends reminded each other of it when they noticed someone sitting alone. And for Brodie, the story became part of his own identity. Not the whole story. He wasn't just the boy with the yearbook anymore. He was Brodie Ritter, a boy who had learned that even in loneliness, hope can arrive when you least expect it. Years later, he would look back on that time and realize that the helmet on his nightstand wasn't just a gift from a movie star. It was a symbol of resilience, of the power of one voice reaching across distance to lift another. It taught him that true heroes don't always battle villains on screen. Sometimes they simply take the time to see you, to say you are not forgotten. And perhaps that is why the story endured. Because in a world where arrogance too often steals the spotlight, the memory of a man writing a letter to a boy, making a simple phone call, offering genuine care, felt like a lighthouse in the fog. For the Ritter family, life moved on. But whenever the world seemed heavy again, Cassandra would glance at the helmet on her son's shelf and smile. Because she knew that kindness, once given, never disappears. It echoes, it lingers, it grows. And so the boy who once wrote in his yearbook, "I hope someday I have more friends," discovered something far greater. He found proof that even in the loneliest moments, compassion can bridge the silence. True heroes aren't defined by costumes or powers. They are the ones who pause, who notice, who take the time to reach out. Sometimes it's a letter, sometimes a small gift, sometimes just a voice saying, "You are not alone."